It is Wednesday, December 27th, 2017, and this is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, where every week I sit down with a comedian or an actor, an improviser, a person of note to talk about their favorite NFL teams. But I also sometimes will just talk to a person about the Seahawks, and that happens quite a bit too, and that's Seahawks Chats. But sometimes in this universe, two worlds can collide and become one, and you never know what great factions of comedy and sports will come together. And today, it's that perfect conglomeration. I'm just throwing around big words and hoping that they work, but this conglomeration of two worlds that come together perfectly for Seaside Chats with Sarah Colonna, who is not just a professional comedian, stand-up, writer, actress, but also very closely tied to the NFL and the Seattle Seahawks. As many fans on Twitter will know, Sarah is married to Jon Ryan, Seattle punter Jon Ryan. So she has a very unique insight, I think, into both the worlds of comedy and sports. Sarah, thank you so much for joining the podcast so that these two great podcast ideas of comedy and sports could come together today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm already intimidated by your use of big words. So, hopefully I can keep up.
Take solace.
I'm just gonna Google words while you say them.
Okay. Yeah, just take solace in the fact that I don't necessarily know if I'm using them right. So, on Seaside Chats, I always start off by talking about, a comedian's where they grew up and what their favorite team was, because usually they're a fan of the opposing team to the Seattle Seahawks for that week. This week, though, of course, it's a different situation, but it's still sort of the same questions. Sarah, where did you grow up, and what was your relationship to the NFL or football as a child growing up?
I grew up in Arkansas, and so there it's college football. I went to the University of Arkansas too, Razorbacks. So everything there is, it's the SEC football. So it's crazy there, and they're giant fans everywhere. So I grew up more around college football than anything. Nobody in my family watched or rooted for, I should say. They watch football all the time, but they mostly rooted for, college football. And then if watching NFL, they didn't really have quite like a team. I mean, sometimes because the Cowboys was close, there's in that area, people are Cowboys fans, luckily not my family. And
perfect.
And then Chiefs as well is another one close by. So people tend to root for places they can go. But that was really it. Like my dad was a sports editor, but he didn't live in Arkansas when my parents split up. He was living in California. And so he actually covered the Rams the first time they were the LA Rams.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first NFL game I went to as a kid, but I didn't care about the Rams, and I'm glad that I never cared about them.
Us too, I think. Fair enough.
Yeah. But it was because I would visit my dad mostly in the summer, when school was out. So I really actually would go with him to baseball more than anything. And I grew up a big baseball fan as well. But because of his job, I was just a sports fan in general. So the short answer is I didn't have an NFL team until I met Jon, and which is nice that I didn't have to change any allegiance or have any weird.
What was your dad's connection to sports? What brought him into? Was it just a journalist, a guy who was interested in journalism and then wound up in sports, or the other way around?
Both. He was, he definitely was, wanted to be a sports editor and a journalist. So, his interest in journalism was always, as far as I know anyway, he's never told me different, that he always wanted to be in sports for it. So, when he was in the Air Force, he worked at the Stars and Stripes paper. And then when we got out, we were in, DC, and he worked at the Washington Star, which doesn't exist anymore. And he also worked at the Miami Herald for a bit. And then he was at the Dallas Morning News that's when my parents split up. We were living in Dallas. And so he was an assistant sports editor there. And then when he lived there probably another year after they split up, and we had moved to Arkansas, and then he got asked to move to Orange County and work for the Orange County Register. So he was just, moving his way up in that world, and until he was sports editor. And I think he just always loved sports, and he loves his it's funny, he's like almost brought it back out of him, because I think once he retired from it, he was sort of over it, almost like forgot it, his interest in the NFL and the Seahawks.
Did you, I know that, sometimes with the children of athletes, that athletes are subject to a lot of ugly fan hate or fan mail, or that it can come across when people are upset with athletes and players. Did you ever get that with your dad? If he was writing about people saying things about your dad's writing or something, did that ever come to affect you, or was it not something that you really were privy or aware of?
No, I wasn't privy to it, and I do think obviously had he worked in the age of more, this was in the 80s and early 90s, so there wasn't as much, quick access to people to go yell at them as there is now with, Twitter and social media, with everything.
Yeah.
So I didn't really hear anything about any of that, which is good. I'm sure if it was this day and age, I'd probably hear about it constantly, and it would drive me crazy. Just like when I hear anything negative, the fans when they're mad about the Seahawks or Jon, whatever, I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, I'm sure we can't. We'll get into it as well with that aspect of things. But at what point for you, growing up in Arkansas and moving around, but at what point for you did you decide to take a path in comedy? And was there any any other plan other than comedy, or was that always the way it was going to be?
No, it was always the way. I always grew up saying I was going to be an actress and a comedian, and my mom was like, "Okay, sure." And then studied theater, and then right after college, I moved out to LA, where my dad was still living. Well, he was still living in Orange County at the time, so I actually had like a little place to land for 8 months or so, and work at a bar and save some money to move up to LA by myself. And so that was, I was 21, and I just kind of started fumbling through it, which I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just tried everything. And then stand-up, I always wanted to do it, but I didn't know how to start. And, these things you just learn when you get there. We didn't have a comedy club in my hometown. We didn't have comedy nights around campus or anything like that. So I had to start sort of doing all that. And with acting, I also found comedy was a way to sort of set yourself apart and show that you can do more than one thing, write, perform, use your own voice in certain ways. So it was a little bit of me kind of trying to mesh it all together.
Yeah.
But now, we're there now, so that's good.
Yeah. Now, in the classic history of mortal enemies in high school, especially in films, I could think of perhaps no two bigger enemies than athletes and the people and drama nerds. And I and so, as yourself, did you ever date athletes? Was it something you were privy, or was it something that was a part of your world? Like, oh yeah, or were you sort of like, hey, you stay on the field and I'll stay on the stage?
No, I went to a pretty small high school, and I had two different quarterback boyfriends. I dated both the quarterbacks my junior year and senior year. So I guess I always had a thing for athletes.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize it. Not in college. In high school, I did.
Yeah. So it was, you've had, at what point, I know that a lot of people have talked about, the story with, I've read the story of, how you guys met via Twitter and everything. In your own words, though, for anyone listening that may be unaware, can you talk about how you and Jon met?
Yeah. So I was working at the time on Chelsea Lately, which was a talk show on E. And with that job, it was sort of put everything together where I got to be on camera and I got to write. So it's sort of that thing where it was like, oh, that it worked for me to do all these things because you can use all those things to get on a show like that because every writer was also a performer. Just we had roundtable, but we also did sketches and whatnot. So I became a full-time writer on there too. And so I knew very well the rest of any of the comedians that came on. And then I guess Jon watched it. Well, I don't guess, I know. He watched the show. He had a crush on me, according to him. He was like, I need to meet that girl. Like, I know we'd get along well. So in a sense, he was a stalker, if you really think about it. So I don't want to encourage girls to just respond to stalkers on Twitter, but sometimes it turns out okay. But Ross Matthews, who is also on that show, is a huge Seahawks fan. He's from he's from Seattle. I forget what town, but he's from here and here being Seattle, and is a giant Seahawks fan. So he was on the sidelines for the NFC Championship game in 2014, and he went up to, or Jon went up to him and just said, "Can you introduce me to Sarah Colonna?"
Yeah.
And Jon said, he went up to him and asked to introduce, and Ross said, "Sure." Just win the game first, and then I'll like tweet you both and whatever. And then Ross texted me, was like, I don't know, this guy seemed pretty cool. I was like, I don't know, is this just like a creepy athlete hitting on me on Twitter? And and it kind of spiraled from there. We were, I found, obviously, which I'm sure all the Seahawks fans know, that he is very funny, and that came out pretty quickly. So I realized that he was funny, and that helped because it broke the ice in a lot of things that I wouldn't have known about him,
Yeah.
So we just started talking, and then it was, I literally started talking to him right before they were going to the Super Bowl.
You say like, well, is this some other creepy athlete or whatever, but is that something that you were, how common was it for guys to hit on you through Twitter or something like that? But especially like, was it the fact that he was a Seahawks player that you're like, I guess this guy's got some legitimacy. He can't be that crazy.
Right. Well, I guess sorry, I said 2014, but I get my football seasons confused. It was 2013. I definitely was like, he can't be, I guess they won it in 2014, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. I get my, good God. But sometimes I'm like, how long have I known you? Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of people who would be like, say kind of crude things. You see that as you would on Twitter a lot. So his approach was definitely not that. And I guess maybe it was like his sense of humor and his non sort of, I don't know. He just didn't say anything offensive, which is a bonus these days.
Right.
On social media, you know what I mean? Like I just stood out because obviously my friend, told me that the tweet was coming and that he thought I should be open to talking to him because he said, everyone in that town loves him and he's got a good personality and he seems, he like hunted me down on the field before a huge game to meet you. So, So, it was sort of just like less creepy because I guess there was like a buffer of somebody that had actually spoken to him. But I still didn't think I was, really going to take it that seriously. I just thought we were kind of I was single, we were flirting. I didn't, it was whatever. And then the week they, that end of January / beginning of February that they went to the Super Bowl, he was just like nonstop texting me from New York. And I thought, it was just funny. I just thought, well, this guy's like obviously more interested in me than I would think if he's flirting with me during like, such a week. And then after the game, I think that's when it really hit me that I was watching it with a bunch of friends, and he sort of texted me right after, and then he kept texting me throughout the night, like from the party and what he was doing, and just he was excited, obviously, to have won, but he just, I thought that it was interesting that he was like sharing that experience with me when we hadn't even met in person yet, but it made me, my friends were like, this is a chance for a guy to do, he just won the Super Bowl. Like he can do anything he wants single, and he's texting you all night, So,
it also seems, it seems a little bit more beneficial too, to just be like, you're not a Seahawks fan too, so it's like, it's not like, I think you could almost say like if it was you would almost, if I was someone who was a Seahawks fan and someone was like, what, does he do this to every Seahawks fan or whatever? But it's like, no, this is unusual for me. You're just one person, and I have a huge crush on you, and this is the situation, right?
Yes, very much so, because he, also I think was aware that I wasn't like he could easily impress with, I think he definitely knew that, because I wasn't, from here. I hadn't, other than always watching Super Bowl games. So yeah, it definitely sunk in to me during that week that he was more interested in meeting me than just flirting with me. Like he really, So after they won, he went to Disneyland he brought his whole family from Canada to Disneyland, and I live in LA. So he came up from there that week, and took me on a date, and then we were married. I mean, we were engaged by December of 2014. So it was, we met, I guess, face to face in February, and then we're engaged by December.
So that's, and from the standpoint of being, talking about the NFL, that's, 4 seasons now that you've been with an NFL player. Well, for people that don't know, like, what's your vantage point? Like, where do you watch the games? What's it like to watch the games? Is it torturous? Is it exhilarating? How has the last 4 years of watching football been for you compared to, prior to that, when you were not so affiliated with watching football?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, it's funny because then the next year, 2015, they're back at the Super Bowl, and I was actually there. I always say the good one versus the bad one, as I'm sure we do too. Yeah, everyone says that. But it was a different experience to sort of. That was, we were dating, so by the start of that season, I was going to more games, but a lot of my stand-up dates had been scheduled already, so I was sort of working around that. So I was attending games as much as I could, but I wasn't at every game. And I was on an airplane when he threw his touchdown pass.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so I can't ever miss. That was like when I first started realizing like I should probably try to be at more games. But it's hard when I already had everything scheduled. So
superstitious fans will say you should always miss.
Right. This is probably true. Although I will say I when I'm there, they seem to do well.
Great.
So we'll just give me that. Maybe that's because he and I weren't like totally, serious yet or something. Or maybe, I don't know, whatever. But I mean, that's not really the case, but I'm just trying to get them to not be superstitious at me, because I don't want to have anyone blame me for anything.
When do you most worry when you're watching the game? Do you ever get worried? I know a lot of people, football is a dangerous sport, but obviously punters take not very many hits, but when do you worry, or do you ever worry while watching games?
Last season he got pretty hurt. And I mean, I don't worry as much. I mean, I can't imagine the other wives and girlfriends and, any of the things that they must deal with their husbands being people that do get hit every single time. And so, it's wrecking. I mean, that was awful. And he broke his nose, I guess, in Minnesota in the playoff game too. But that wasn't as bad. But they handle it very well. The Seahawks, I have to give them huge credit. They really handle it well, because they they just take care of you immediately and get you in a room where you can talk to John Schneider came out and talked to me, and just they handle it well, and you know that they're taken care of, but it doesn't matter when it happens. And like I remember being at the Dallas game when Ricardo Laquette got hurt, and that was the first time I think I'd been at a game when I saw someone get so hurt that it was terrifying, and I'd only met him a couple of times, but you still are just like, oh, this is, I mean, I hate it when I see it on anybody. But it was the first time I'd been around sort of that. And I just kept thinking like, God, his family must be freaking out. And then I started thinking, oh, is that, I guess, family too? Like for, John, if that's something like that happened to him, how would I feel? So it is nerve-wracking. I don't, but like I said, I don't have to worry about it on every play, except for the fact that he does like to do fakes, and sometimes, sometimes that means he'll be out there for it. But no, it's not for the most part. I mean, you were also asking me about just going to games, and like I said, like that first year, I wasn't at a lot of them, but after that touchdown pass, and well, we were engaged by then too. So I was like, okay, I'm not missing anything else. And just in general, that year I hated missing on. And also I hadn't, I had just met him, and he'd been playing his whole life. And it's something I wanted to know more about, obviously too. So I just, after that year, I started sort of trying to schedule my stand-up dates around being here for home games. And then if I'm on the road, and when they're on the road, I actually was scheduling dates like around that, I would go to, I'm going to perform in Dallas this weekend. Oh, I'll be in Nashville that weekend. Like I was figuring stuff out like that. And now I'm almost at every home game. Last year, I think I was. And then this year, I got a job in Atlanta filming. I'm filming a new Netflix series. And so I have been gone a lot, but the last 2 games I watched in Atlanta, they lost. So I started really thinking maybe that was my fault.
In I guess in the NFL world, specifically in the Seahawks world, especially, you're known as like a comedian who's married to Jon Ryan, but it also is just as a stand-up. But in the stand-up world, do people know about your relationship to the NFL? Are comedians? Are there a lot of other comedians who are like jealous of your relationship to the NFL, or ask you questions or stuff like that? Is it a curiosity, or does the stand-up world did the two worlds sort of not collaborate in that Venn diagram?
No, they do. There's a lot of football fans. A lot of the comedian guys, especially, are fans, and so it actually is kind of nice. It gives us something else to talk about than stand up. Like comedians get tired of talking about stand up with each other. So I think it's kind of nice. And, a lot of them have questions, or, things like you're asking, like, what's it like to be at a game and worrying about someone, and, all those things. So it's kind of fun to have something else to shoot the shit about in the green room in between shows or whatever. And then if they're also Seahawks fans, then, it's fun if it's spring and it's the off season and John gets to come with me, then, that stuff is really cool too.
Yeah. And there any,
it's like at this point, more people know. So then no matter where I'm performing, if he's there, then people are excited to like, oh, now they also get to meet John or something. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Is there, besides that, you mentioned 2013 and the championship, and that was the beginning of your relationship. You mentioned 2014 when you were on the plane during Jon Ryan's touchdown pass, of course. But in the last 3 years or whatever, any personal highlights, any personal moments coming from games that you watched? Maybe it wasn't even necessarily that the Seahawks won or that Jon Ryan had an incredible play or anything, but any personal anecdotes directly related to any of the games that just make you smile or remind you, just sort of the special moments of these last few years?
It's a few things with Seattle, and like I have said this many times, and I'm not just making it up to make them like me. Seahawks fans are awesome. I've had the best experiences at games. first from them, yes, it's nice when someone recognizes you or says like, hey, I like your work or whatever, but just like not having nothing to do with me and just being at the games, the fans they're just so into it, and there's no way to not be into it. And I know that's probably all fan bases. I mean, I've been to a ton of away games now, and that's something that's interesting to see how they act in other stadiums and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the energy of that field, and then just things. Then when we'll be out, and I've been with him so many times when someone will just stop and be like, it's not just your average, like, oh, can I have a picture? Or, oh, hey, it's like shake your hand and say thanks for what you did for this city. And I think that's cool. Like, I think it's cool when people are, it means something to them. Like, sports means something more to them than just, watching a game and for a few hours and shooting the shit and drinking beer, even though that all of that is also awesome. So seems like fans here appreciate that. And so I really love seeing that aspect of it and what it, means. And I like seeing what the guys do for their community. They all have all these charities, and I've been to, like Cliff Averill had an event this year that we all went to. And it's just nice seeing the heart, I guess, of what's behind the team and behind football. And I know that's with across the NFL, a lot of those guys do these sorts of things. But when you're a part of it and you kind of see how people react and treat people, it's kind of cool.
Well, Jon's got a really cool job, but you have a pretty fucking cool job yourself, getting to be a comedy writer. And obviously Jon is a comedy fan, a funny guy who obviously spotted you in a comedy show and, things. So obviously he must be a pretty big comedy fan. On the flip side, have you managed to be like, hey, do you want to go backstage to the show? Or have you taken him to shows or anything like that? And on the flip side for Jon Ryan to geek out on comedy?
Yeah, well, he goes with me to shows a lot in the off season, like I was saying. So he it's funny to watch him be sort of, watch the audience. And I mean, I've told him so many times, I'm like, most of the time when you're doing that, you have 5 shows that weekend. I'm like, you don't have to be here. You can go, go to dinner, go to a bar, go to a movie tonight. Like, you don't have to go to the last show on Saturday night. You've seen this shit 4 times already this weekend. And he's like, no, he loves it. He just loves going to shows. And then he's definitely gotten to meet like like I took him to a birthday party at Chelsea's that same year that we met. And so he got to meet a bunch of people that were at that show, at that place and at her place. And then just my friends who I'm close to. And he's a big comedy fan. So he definitely loves hanging out with those guys. And Ross actually ended up officiating our wedding since we were like, you kind of introduced us, so I guess you're going to officiate the wedding. So he's definitely gotten to experience some cool things. And like we're, hopeful he can come to Atlanta for some of the filming, but hopefully not till like, after February or so. So we'll see. Hopefully he's not available. But yeah, it's cool to get to share that stuff. It actually kind of like gives me new life, because I'm like, if I get a little drained from being on the road, because I had a book come out when he and I met, and in 2015. So we had been together, almost a year, I guess, at that point. And he came on the road with me for that book tour, and it was just exhausting. I was doing a different city every weekend, and 5 shows in the weekend, and it was fun, but it was more fun because I was sharing it with someone who was like, no, this is really cool. Like, don't forget what you do is cool. Like what you're saying. Like, don't forget it's just a job to you, but it's really cool and exciting. And so it's kind of nice to have people that to be with someone that you can sort of bring new life into your job.
Yeah, absolutely. And other thing too is the punter positions. I mean, it's so interesting because there's only 32 of them. They're so hard to get because of that. But then also, if you can find yourself in one and, again, do well, you can comfortably stay there for a while. And Jon Ryan spent 10 years with the Seahawks, which is a huge, long amount of time. And he spent 8 years with Pete Carroll, 8 years with John Schneider, 8 years, I believe, with special teams coach Brian Schneider. How would you describe the relationships that you and Jon has with the organization, with the franchise where he's the longest tenured player, and the amount of time, spending so much of his career with one coach? What are the relationships like there?
It's cool because he started in Green Bay and they cut him when he, in his second year, when he was having a great season, and he doesn't really know why they cut him. But John Schneider was there at the time, actually. And so when Jon came over to the Seahawks after Jon Ryan was signed with them, he was like, oh shit, this guy. Oh no, is he gonna cut me again? And they have the best relationship, are really good friends. And with Pete, Jon just respects the hell out of him, and I can just tell they all respect him as well. I was with him when he signed his latest contract. We had to fly here and go up to the offices and do the signing, and I met Pete Carroll, and I definitely got weird. I definitely was like, oh, it's so weird to be in the same room with Pete, no matter. Yeah, I'd seen him at a Christmas party, and sort of briefly said hello to him. But when it was just me, him, and Jon in a room, I was like, oh my God, it's Pete Carroll. This is fucking amazing, Yeah. And he was such a nice guy. But that everyone that I've really met in the organization, they all just seem to really respect each other. I mean, as Jon has many times said about Pete, he's such a player's coach. So I don't think he could be happier where he is. I think this is where he hopes to retire, when he hopes to play with them until he retires and not play with anyone else. And, knock on wood.
Yeah.
You never know. But yeah, it's definitely a cool relationship. It seems like they all have with each other. And I think he often says he thinks people who would come and play for Pete that don't know would, because some coaches aren't as pleasant to work for. So he's oh, if some of those guys under those coaches came and worked with Pete, they'd be like, what? This is amazing.
Yeah. There's also and I think you'd also have a good perspective on this, which is a lot of times the special teams guys, kickers and punters, get looped in as with being sort of kooky, that they're unusual or for whatever reason. And I think also with punters, you've got, along with Jon Ryan, who made an appearance on American Ninja Warrior and sort of has crossed over into other things. You've got Pat McAfee, and you've got the former Vikings punter whose name escapes me right now. But with those types of guys, do you see any misconceptions about punters or special teams guys? Is it its own world from your perspective, having been so close to one now for 4 or 5 years? Any perspective on the sort of stereotypes about punters?
Totally. I think because I sort of didn't understand it at first. So I was like, I don't get why people were oh, punters are people too, or whatever, which is now just a thing, that is an old saying, and it's funny. But Jon kind of explained it the best, I think, by saying back, years ago, the punter was probably the beer drinker and didn't have to be as in good a shape or whatever, but the game's changed, and and maybe that's why that. I mean, I forget exactly how he said it, but he feels like it got this stigma way early on. And obviously over the past several years, decades, I'm sure, those guys they're in amazing shape. I mean, remember the Giants punter too, that was known for being so fit. And I know that Jon is obviously as well. And I just think that, and I think people who understand football understand the importance of field position and of their position more. So I think, but they still, I just feel like that stigma is always kind of there for some reason for all the special teams. And maybe it's just because they don't get the glory. They're not they're not the guys that everyone's always talking about. So, man, maybe that's part of it too, or you just sort of, people have that you had one job mentality, right? With with special teams too, probably. So, yeah, I still don't quite understand it. Even when Jon was like, oh, I just think it's like an old thing. And now punters and kickers and long snappers, all of them are like very athletic. And clearly, I don't know how you could be a professional athlete and not be. So,
Right.
so I don't really know where it came from, but I think maybe it is just because they spent a little more time, they're a smaller group spending the time sort of off on their own. And, when he out there warming up, it's a lot less people than than the rest of the team warming up together. But they all, work out together and interact obviously constantly at work. So I think.
Yeah. How much were you there? Or, I mean, obviously you heard all about it, but what was the training process for him like with American Ninja Warrior? And what's the thing after American Ninja Warrior that he maybe like thinks about the most that he could have done differently?
I was like, I didn't understand why he wanted to do it because I had never watched the show. But I was like, why do you want to do something? He was like, I won't win. I'm too big. Like, I'm too heavy. It's just fun. And I was like, I don't understand why you want to do something that you won't win. And then he made me, and then I watched the show. I realized I was like, oh, I see. Like, it's fun. It's just obviously a lot of the people who are doing it train for years to become the American Ninja Warrior. So that's why I didn't quite understand why he wanted to do it. But they had asked him a few times, and he was like, I just think it would be really fun, and I know I won't win, and I just want to do it, And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. And then because he's insane, he had like contacted all these people who had been on American Ninja Warrior through Twitter and come out and try out on use their practice fields. They build these giant fields in their backyards and stuff. Not fields, but they mimic the sets in their backyards and do all this stuff. So he would go out and hang out with them and try their courses. And he was like, see, I'm telling you, it's gonna be fine. I think he wished he got further, but I was impressed when he did the thing where they swung on I don't know, there was hanging down ribbons, and he swung on those, and I was like, how anyone can do that. And then I think he lost out on the table, and he was like, yeah, I'm just, it's you got to be a little quicker and a little lighter for those kinds of things. So I just think it was, I think he went out as he expected. I'm sure he would have liked to have gotten further, but he just had a good time doing it, and it was fun. Jermaine Curse came out to watch, him and Derek Coleman both came out to watch, and so we were just all in the audience and had signs up that said Ginger Ninja, and it was just a fun experience. It was very fun. I mean, I don't know if he would do it again, or if it was that was it, I just wanted to do it one time. But he had a good time.
So in your personal thing now with getting into football, in your adult life, how much more have you learned in the game in the last 4 years? Do you consider yourself, a bit of an expert now that you get to hear so much about the game? Do you watch the games with Jon afterwards ever? Or do you need to talk about it after that? Or would you say you're more just still a casual fan, but very invested in one person as well as one team?
I would say I definitely would never consider myself an expert, and when I hear people, say certain things, and I know a little bit better about one thing, but I know I don't know as much about another. I mean, I definitely know a lot about punting, which I never thought I would. So that much I really know, and I understand it a lot more. I understand sometimes they're not there to kick as far as they can. Sometimes there's a strategy, and so those things can be frustrating when a fan will be like, well, why didn't it go 70 yards? And you're like, well, there's a reason for it, but that stuff can drive me kind of crazy, so I just have to stay off Twitter during games. I would say I don't, there's still times when I'm watching live especially, and I will hear everyone around me see a penalty the second it's happened, and I'm like, how did you see that? How do you know it was holding? How did you see that? You know, so I definitely still have plenty to learn, and I'll ask. That's the good thing is as long as he's played football, I certainly would consider him an expert at it, and he knows a lot, and he never gets frustrated if I have a question that after he answers it, I'm like, oh, maybe that was a dumb question because the answer seems so simple. But he doesn't. He never does that to me. He's very good about like sort of. Well, again, probably that thing where it breathes a little new life into it, where he's like, oh, she's interested, and actually I can explain that part to her.
Yeah.
Why did this happen, or why did this go this way?
We should.
So some of that stuff, I'll always be learning, I guess.
And you brought up also another interesting aspect that I want to hit before we go, which is the Twitter aspect of it. You've been thrust into Seahawks Twitter, maybe unexpected that from where you were 5 years ago to be a part of this Seahawks Twitter verse. Highlights, lowlights. Is it hard for you to stay on Twitter during the games?
I have to sort of stay away from it. I had one moment where I lost my mind on Joe Buck because I forget. I think it's probably been 3 years now, 3 seasons ago. Like I say, like when you say year instead of season, I always get confused. But they start in one year and they end in another. So I'm always like, which season was that? But anyway, it was a couple years ago. He was John fumbled. He just fumbled a punt, and it dropped out of his hand. Happens. Nobody wants it to happen, but it happens. And Joe Buck said, I'm going to act like I'm trying to remember the quote. Meanwhile, I remember it. Jon Ryan setting back the punters are athletes too movement, with that fumble or something. And I know that's their job, is to be colorful and whatever. But I completely lost my mind on Twitter. Like all night, I was like tweeting what an asshole he was. And it wasn't at mention. I wasn't like tweeting at him. I was just like, the guy's sure he fumbled a punt, but to insult someone's athletic ability over a play, like, yeah, it just made me crazy. But then it became funny because Joe Buck obviously has his people who like to give him shit too. So it just became sort of funny to keep. I wasn't being mean or attacking him. I was just like kind of calling him out, and in a sort of semi-funny way, I think, hopefully. But and then a couple years later, people are always like, "Hey, Joe Buck's on." What's Sarah gonna say? Like, there were so many people that were following it that they were giving me, and I'm like, I like the guy. I think he's like good at his job, and he's actually pretty funny. And so I've since forgiven him, even though he's never asked me for forgiveness, and probably has zero idea that I completely lost my mind on him for an entire evening. Yeah. Because like I said, don't at people. You don't have to tag them. You can just say what you need to say. They don't need to see all the responses. But so after that, I was like, even though I thought it was funny, I was like, okay, I can't get upset every time somebody says something negative, because that's all people are going to love you 1 minute and hate you 2 seconds later during the same game, you being the players. So I can't take it. Certainly during the game, I try to I'm never negative. Like, I don't like when people get negative about the game. I mean, I can sometimes, I get it, but it's not going to do me any good. And I don't think it would be a good look for me too. Except one time this year, I tweeted, I said, I love my husband, but I'm sick of seeing him, because he had punted like 8 times, Yeah. And that's an obvious reference to, that you don't want to see the guy all the time because you want touchdowns. And some blog picked it up and was like, Seahawks punter's wife calls out the offense. And I'm like, that's not what I did. I didn't, I was making a joke about, I wasn't shitting on the offense. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I could say that. But anyway, it was like well-known joke that you don't, people are always like, love John, hope we don't see him much today, because everyone wants to be scoring touchdowns. Totally. So I get frustrated at that kind of stuff, because I'm like, you can't even just have fun without everyone taking it so seriously and saying like she called them out. And I was like, that's not a headline that Jon wants to see or wants, you know. I mean,
Right.
it was clickbait, but it was just annoying.
Yeah, you've
Kind
been looped in with some of the players that when the media wants to stir up a potential locker room controversy with the Seahawks, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes I keep that in mind of like how it's going to be interpreted, but I'm like, I'm not gonna not make a joke about that because who cares?
Right.
It's like, yeah, he wants them to be scoring everyone wants to be scoring touchdowns. So you know, it's fine, but I definitely have learned to, there's plenty of people on there that are fun to engage with during the game. And, you know, it doesn't have to be about like specifics of players or of anything, just sort of, you know, fans watching the game together via social media, because you can now. So, so that part of it is enjoyable. And then if something doesn't go well on the field, I'm like, I'm just not going to watch. I'm not going to look at my social media until the next, you know, until something good happens, and then people aren't going to be bitchy again. So I just have to.
And what about the status too of like Jon Ryan and, you know, your husband, your family, all of that sort of stuff when it comes into like the contract stuff? You know, a lot of people this season they'll talk about it year to year with punters or kickers. About like, well, maybe this is the year where we can go cheaper on that position. Do you think about that kind of stuff? Do you try and block it out? Do you talk about it? What exactly do you do when people talk about, you know, when your husband's financial information is out there for all of his fans to see, but also for just knowing like, okay, well, how do you approach those situations when people talk about, you know, cutting a person in such a, and they most of the times, I mean, fans and writers and everyone so casually talk about firing a person basically, or taking their contract or their job away. How do you approach that?
Yeah, especially when you know it's literally just about salary.
Right.
I tried, you know, I've only been through it once with him because he had such a long contract that, you know, until we were together for a couple of years, he didn't have to renew one, and so. But he had such a long one, and due to that, he definitely outplayed that contract, and it wasn't a huge contract, and so for me, I mean, it was good. He's not complaining, nobody is, but that for whatever his first one was, which I don't even know, I probably should know, but I don't. But I just knew that he was in a long contract. I think it was a 6-year contract, and it was so by the time over those course of those years, it seemed like punters were getting paid more. He was still making a little bit less, even though he was more of a veteran. So I sort of started looking at it that year of his contract that no matter what people said, I was like, some people are going to say he deserves it. Some people are going to say he doesn't. And I mean, it's still not, you know, it's definitely not as not crazy as a lot of people's. I think his is reasonable and good. And he mostly just wanted to keep playing. And so the fact that they would give him a 4-year one, he was like, that's all I want, you know, and then pay out over that time. But, I just had to tune it out and sort of think, I know how long he's played. I know that there was a time when he probably should have been paid a little bit more just because there was a thing in how punters and kickers were getting paid, and he wasn't. So in my mind, I just go, he deserves it. He's been here a long time. He's been around a long time, and he's always been consistent. So I just have to keep that in my head. And then if you read an article about someone, you know, saying what they say, you just sort of ignore it. And then with my family, they'll just, you know, they don't say much, but I had a couple of friends, you know, like my cousin was like, I guess dinner's on you guys next year, whatever, you know, like just a couple of jokes here and there when his, like the number came out of his contract. And I'm like, okay, it is weird. It's very strange. But it's just sort of part of it. So I just sort of try to think like, I know how hard he works, you know, what other people were getting paid. And, you know, you just try to keep that in your mind and don't let the negative stuff get in there.
Well, Sarah, this is for the final, you know, talk about the part of the podcast. You know, you're a Seahawks fan. Just as a Seahawks fan, you know, they're up against it this weekend. They got to beat the Arizona Cardinals to keep their playoff hopes alive. And then they have to hope that the Falcons lose in order to get into the postseason so that Jon and all the other Seahawks can go to the playoffs for the 6th year in a row, keep that streak alive. keep your streak alive of, you know, being married to a Seahawk as he gets to go to the playoffs every year. I'm sure you want that to happen. As a fan and as someone who, you know, has gauged the temperature perhaps of at least one Seahawk, what are your thoughts and feelings about this finale?
You know, I know he's feeling good. I know that they had a rough go of it 2 weeks ago, but you know, and as I kept saying to Jon, I was like, you guys also beat the Rams at the beginning of the season, and it was ugly for sure. But I'm not like this guy is falling kind of person. So I just thought, well, they'll just have to let that go. And obviously they looked good last week, and obviously they feel good. And I just think the morale is high, and they just want to win. And they're very clear, you know, of what has to happen. And I'm like, I feel like it could I think it's like, I don't know. I don't want to curse anything, so I won't say, but I definitely have a good feeling. I think I mean, it's Atlanta just needs to lose. That's all.
I have a good feeling as well.
But I already know that's going to happen. So now we just need Atlanta to lose, and I feel like they will. I'm not in Atlanta right now. I've been there filming, and so maybe I was accidentally bringing them good luck, and now I'm not there right now. So that's also good.
Okay.
We can just add that to my pats on the back that I'm going to give myself. Yeah. So I have a good feeling, and I think they're very, you know, they're just sort of. He was saying as they were watching, you know, kind of keeping track of everything last week, that they were just sort of noticing that most of the games they needed to go a certain way were going their way.
Yeah.
As they did. And I think that that keeps morale up too. Like, okay, like we're you know, not only do we have to be better, but like our chances are still there, and we're still really like more alive than we even thought. So,
yeah. Well,
it's
right there, you know, it's right there for the taking for the Seahawks, and we'll see what happens this weekend. Thank you so much, Sarah Colonna, for joining the show. There's so much. I never even got into scare tactics, so we're going to have you back and talk about that sometime.
Oh, totally. Oh my God, that was so much fun. That show was a blast. So I'm happy to come back and talk about it. It was crazy.
Absolutely. You can follow Sarah on Twitter if you aren't already at Sarah Colonna, 1L 2 N's. You also have a book out that people can buy. I'm pulling it up right now, a little bit behind. Has anyone seen my pants?
Yes.
Netflix 2018 Insatiable.
Yeah, so it's a great series, and it's going to be out in the summer, either June or August. I don't think they've given us our release date yet, but it's a 1-hour show. It's in it. So I hope everyone will watch that on Netflix too. And then I'll be at the Tacoma Comedy Club in April for all of the local people that are listening in. April 19th through the 22nd, I think, is the dates. So, but those are on my website too. So
SarahColonna.com. You can check that out for the dates. And thank you for going on a date with Jon Ryan so that years later you could come on the show and talk about the Seahawks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sarah. This has been Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. That's me, Kenneth Arthur. You can follow us on Twitter at Field Gulls or at Kenneth Arthur S and fieldgulls.com. We will be back next week for some other feature, and maybe it'll be about the playoffs. We'll see what happens this weekend as the Seahawks take on the Arizona Cardinals and the Falcons take on the Panthers. This has been Seaside Chats, and we'll talk to you next time.